Hi. If you're sitting there watching this video, it's because it's just about the end of week 2, and I wanted to give you a video that for everybody who's already done the assigned work is a kind of a look back at things so you know exactly what the important information was you should have taken away from everything you did. And if you haven't finished the work of the week yet, call this just a little bit of a shove in the right direction. Hopefully, after you watch this, knowing the information to take away from the work will make it that much easier to get it done. One of the first and most important things that we did this week is to examine the language of college as the result of the conventions of college communication. One of those first conventions to take a look at is the specialized terminology, depending on the subject. We find that really any subject of research that we do comes along with not just terms, but specialized ways of making sense of that subject. After that, another one of the conventions of college communication comes from the fact that we are in a new and unique situation that determines what's meaningful, that being the situation of college itself. Within the situation of college, new ideas are meaningful, old ones not so much. New ways of talking about those ideas are meaningful, though not all of them. And specifically, we've got to make sure that we are using the right wording and referring to the right people. Otherwise, again, what we do isn't going to be taken as meaningful. To pick up from that very last point, this college communication and the conventions along with it have to come with reference to the sources of ideas. Otherwise, those ideas might not be taken seriously, or we might be accused of dishonesty. And this goes back to the discussion of plagiarism and academic honesty that we did earlier this week. If we're going to base an entire paper on a set of ideas, we better make sure those ideas come from someone who was really good at what they were doing. But at the same time, we've got to be really careful about how we refer to those ideas. We have to cite all the ones that come directly from that person who's really good at what they were doing. Otherwise, if we overborrow and undercite, we might just be committing plagiarism, and that would be bad. Now, all in all, what this means is that we require a specialized structure that makes it easy to do all these things, and that specialized structure is the essay. Hopefully, another one of the things you've already done for this week is take a look at the short video on essay structure and why essays are structured that way. It starts by acknowledging the essay structure that I'd imagine we're all familiar with because we've been writing these things ever since we were little. The introduction, body, conclusion, or IBC essay. We know this. Now, one of the things I like a lot about the way that video is set up is that it delivers a pretty concise set of 3 things that each of the 3 sections of the essay does. The introduction gives us the central issue, in other words, the thing to be made sense of somehow. It gives us the thesis, in other words, this is the take on the issue that the author and the paper that the author writes will be arguing. And it gives us a kind of an outline that tells us what to expect in the rest of the paper or essay and how to expect it to be organized. After that, as the video takes a look at the body of the essay, it tells us, of course, that the body is going to be where the argument of the essay is developed. It'll be in the body of the essay where possible objections to the points of the argument are anticipated. And by anticipating those possible objections, the body replies to them, thus trying to make sure that the argument is bolstered and as strong as it can be. One of the most helpful things for me, just because this last section of the essay is always tough for me to think about, is the discussion of what a conclusion does. A conclusion doesn't just wrap things up, but instead it restates our thesis, it reviews the most important things that the rest of the essay has done, and it offers a final commentary, or just something for the reader to take with him or her as they leave the essay and go on to do other things. Now, one of the things I like a lot about this video is that it talks about the way that we might at times find essay form to be a little bit stiff or a little bit artificial, but it then looks at the fact that we could do other things other ways, but in the end, doing other things doesn't really give us the compromise we need between content delivery and successful audience appeal. That compromise is what essay form does. It's not perfect, but overall, it's going to give us the best way of conveying our ideas to the audience that wants to hear them the most and is the most capable of thinking about them and replying to them. Lastly, the essay is also a way of modeling how professional scholarly academics communicate. And that's really big. If we're in this course to study reading and writing, we might as well be producing the sorts of texts that professional scholars also produce. Another one of the focuses of the week has been on the rhetorical modes. Now, rhetorical modes evolve because they're ways of communicating common sorts of ideas. Their existence is owed to the frequency with which academic writers need to develop and express the ideas the more modes correspond to. Right, just to take a quick example of one of the modes that I'd imagine you're all very familiar with, the narrative. One of the things that not just academic writers, but human beings do is make points by telling stories. This is one of the reasons that language evolved in the first place. Otherwise, if you think of the other modes, one of the things that academic papers often do is take a look at processes and break those things down to see how they might work better, thus the process analysis. Right, so this is the reason that I had you take a look at what those are and take the short quiz. We want to know what these things are because, for all intents and purposes, they're tools in the toolbox. These are the tools the writer uses in order to make sure that ideas are not just developed thoroughly, but in ways that other writers will recognize as they read our writing. Right, so just the same way that tools allow us to create an end product that people recognize as being high quality, so too do the rhetorical modes work to make sure that as we develop our ideas, the readers of our writing see exactly how those ideas are developing and understand where we're going with them. Speaking of modes, we'll want to start thinking about which of the modes will fit into a draft of our first essay, and I'll be addressing this further down the road a little bit. This won't be the only time. Now, to look at what that essay will be, we're going to be taking a look at cultural perspectives on plagiarism and academic honesty. And for those of you who've already done the reading for this week, I doubt that's very surprising. Generally speaking, what I'll be asking you to do is start by explaining your understanding of plagiarism. After that, talk a bit about cultural relativism and why it's important to an examination of plagiarism across cultures. Take a look at the two longer scholarly articles as a way of drawing out of them two different cultural perspectives on plagiarism, the Chinese perspective and Greek cultural perspective. Conclude by offering up an assessment of how much of plagiarism and academic honesty needs to be consistent across cultures versus how much changes. And lastly, we'll take this as a first opportunity to practice citing and including end citations in our documents. So we'll do some of that too. Now, to give you a brief introduction to the last essay you'll be reading, this is going to finish what's called our theoretical framework. A theoretical framework is a really important thing. The theoretical framework establishes a set of ideas which, when used together, will give shape and structure to the analysis we need to carry out. Hopefully you remember shape and structure. In an earlier video this week, I talked about the fact that that's one of the two reasons we include information from outside. We either use it to support our ideas, or alternatively, we use it as a way of giving shape and structure to our analysis. And that's exactly what we'll be doing with the concepts of cultural relativism and the other concepts that you'll find in the two articles, those being plagiarism across cultures and cultural values, plagiarism and fairness, when plagiarism gets in the way of learning. Now, to that end, I will be posting the next couple of days for the beginning of next week a set of reading questions and notes for the last article. Between this article and the previous one, you really will have encountered a pretty wide variety of academic articles. This one is much more on the social scientific end of things, as you'll see through information like the polls that they took and the tables that are included, where the earlier article was much more essay form and narrative. So note the difference as you go. There is one important thing, though, that I would like to point out with this last article, and of course, that is that overall, people almost never read every word of a scholarly article. Generally speaking, when they find a scholarly article through the process of research, there's something very specific that they're working from drawing from it. And because of that, they look in the places in the essay where it's most likely they'll find that information, rather than just reading the entire thing. Now, for us, the information that we're most likely to find in this article is not all over the place. Instead, I'm going to make it a little bit easier and more manageable. The relevant material has to do with the way that the Greek students viewed plagiarism in coursework, cheating on exams, and pressures they experienced to get higher grades. And this goes from page 7 to page 19. That's 12 pages, and it's much more manageable than trying to read every word of the 21 pages that the article takes up. So, like I said, it's a look back at the work from the rest of the week and maybe an introduction to that work if you haven't done it yet. Make sure to finish that up because, like I alluded to earlier, you will be drafting out your first essay next week. For the time being, take a look back at everything, finish up what you need to, have a lovely weekend, and I'll have more posted for the beginning of next week. Thanks a lot.